Hi, I'm Ali Porti, fashion and lifestyle journalist and editor of Zayla magazine. I've always been interested in biographies and in the stories of people's lives, basically listening to what stirs their souls. Welcome to the soulful side of life, where I let you in on some of my conversations with inspiring people from around the world in fashion, faith, entertainment, music, and entrepreneurship. These are conversations that stir the soul about people's journeys, about the ups and downs of life, and how they have overcome certain situations. I hope that these episodes will inspire your life in some way, so enjoy over a cup of something hot or on your drive to work. This is The Soulful Side of Life and can be found on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. I had the privilege of sitting down with Yi-Hwa Hanna in Dubai at the cutest modern Japanese-like cafe, Avancha, matcha cafe near the On-Passive metro station. And it was such a delight because she not only is bubbly and kind, but she's genuine kind, boundaried, but still genuine and kind, and exudes this joy. And let me just tell you a little bit about her. She's an author, and in addition to that, she's the editor of a Middle East edition of a leading global travel magazine brand based in Dubai. Her words have been published in a range of top-tier international and regional publications over the past 20 years, including Women's Health, Men's Health, Business Traveler, Grazia, Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar, Good Housekeeping, Etihad Inflight, and so many more. She has also worked at a tech-driven startup at a few of those, and leading global communications firms, tech-driven startups, and with government clients. Yi-Hwa's fiction work has won her first place in the 2023 Emirates LitFest Writing Prize, as well as writing in the inaugural first chapter Elf Siddiqui Writers Fellowship in 2022, Gotham Writers Workshop Coming of Age Contest in 2022, and Dubai's Future Foundation's Echoes of Tomorrow sci-fi short story competition in 2024. As a journalist, she has written about a broad range of topics from lifestyle, fashion, and beauty to technology and business, but her key specialties are travel, health, and wellness, and the food and beverage sector. In this episode, she talks about her journey in media, how to navigate through the rough media climate that we're all experiencing at the moment, and the ways in which you can pitch to an editor. So enjoy this podcast episode with Yi-Hwa Hanna and be inspired, especially if you're a media guru. I think you'll find it useful and a blessing. Yi-Hwa, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I really wanted to talk to you as a magazine editor about what is your opinion, and even forecasting of the state of media in 2025, and your advice to young people who are thinking to become journalists and to go into the media industry. That's the theme of this podcast.
Okay.
So my first question is your dad is Arab and your mom is Taiwanese, and you grew up in Dubai. What was it like being a third culture kid?
Well, you're going straight in there with the big topic and the big questions. All right. Well, I think it's gonna take quite a few subtopics to answer your first question, which is the theme of where media is going, because I think there are some very specific, interesting directions it's going in. And in terms of me being a third culture kid, So I actually grew up between Sharjah and Dubai, and it was very different back then. I often joke with people that I can never go back to the town that I grew up in because it doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
I never thought I would be someone who moved back to the small town that I grew up in, but that town no longer exists. And at the end of the day, for me, I never really thought of myself as a third culture kid until I actually left. And I went back to the States where I was born because almost everyone around me was also a third culture kid, and I think it was the true melting pot, and it was a beautiful environment of all these different cultures coming together. So many of my friends that I went to high school with were also mixed, mom from one place, dad from another, had lived somewhere else, grew up in the UAE, and so it was this wonderful world where I never really questioned multiculturalism as being something different or strange. And I think it's one of the things that opened up my mind to storytelling in the first place, because growing up in an environment like that, you learn so much about different cultures and the way different people see the world. And it really helps to inform the way that you start to ask questions differently and you want to see things differently. And I think that has informed a lot of my life as a storyteller, whether it's writing fiction or for magazines.
Yeah, that's amazing. Would you say that your childhood growing up in Dubai and being a third culture kid inspired you to want to go into media?
It's sort of funny. In a way, now that I look back on it, I realize that it definitely would have. Maybe in a way I didn't realize at the time. But actually, when I was growing up here, I always thought it was an impossible dream that I would never be able to achieve. I mean, it's sort of a bit of a sob story. I've said this on another podcast before, actually, but when I was growing up, I used to hold some of these fancy, glossy magazines that I'd buy with my pocket money at the supermarket for these imported prices, and I'd hold them up, and I'd hold one half of the magazine in front of half of my face. And I would look at it thinking, maybe if I could look like the women on the covers of these magazines, then maybe one day I'll be pretty. Because I didn't ever grow up seeing someone who looked like me. It was so rare, whether it was in movies or in magazines or other forms of media, but it was also the fact that I never imagined seeing someone like me as the editor. And it was quite a big moment for me when I was the editor-in-chief of Women's Health Middle East, and I got to New York on a trip, and I went to Duane Reade, and I had to pick up a copy of it, and seeing my name on the list of international editors there was quite a big moment for me, because it was really emotional.
Of course.
Even though I was born in the States, seeing my name on the American edition made me feel like I'd made it, and to this day, the rush of seeing my name in print never gets old for the magazines here. It's still one of those pinch me moments to think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I get to do this, even though I've been doing it for more than 20 years now. And so this is a very roundabout way of answering your question, but actually it never crossed my mind that this is what I'd want to do when I grew up, because I didn't think it was an option for me. And culturally speaking, I think Arab and Chinese culture, both of them are among those that push you to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. I once read this piece that was talking about how it tends to be a career path that is pushed upon you by people of immigrant families. And it's because our parents hope for the best for us, and they see those careers as a secure foundation to building your future, so you can build a better life than maybe what they had to fight to get for you. And it really opened up my eyes to a lot of the mentality behind it, and it made me understand that it wasn't that our parents were trying to force us into things that weren't right for us. They simply wanted us to be safe, because creative careers weren't necessarily an option. The industry wasn't hiring people like us, and it wasn't something that could be easily done, and it wasn't something that was very financially viable, and so they were only saying it to protect us. But I remember when I went to university, I have a degree in economics, I have French literature as my secondary degree, and I never imagined that I would end up actually working in media. When I went to college, I wanted to be a lawyer. I worked as a paralegal for 2 years upon graduation, and I did an internship on the side for a friend of mine. Her boyfriend had started up a company with his friend. It was a little startup that was writing reviews written by real human beings, and they had started in a few cities across the States, and she needed a marketing and a PR intern. And I really loved the storytelling aspect of it. And that little startup turned out to be Yelp.com. I mean, it was Yelp. It just turned out to be as big as it was. And I remember going home from university after I graduated and telling my parents, I've decided that I don't want to be a lawyer, I want to be a journalist. And I remember my dad looked at me and he said, you're going to be poor for the rest of your life. And he meant it with love. And I just remember looking at him saying, maybe so, but at least I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think he was wrong and I was right, and I was wrong and he was right. It's both. It's very hard to make money in this industry.
Yes.
It's also possible to make it big in this industry, but it is the realities of media, I've realized along the way, are not what they show you in the movies. I mean, most careers
like How
aren't.
to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
world. Yeah.
to be fair, being a lawyer, it's not the same as it looks on TV. And I mean, what doctor in reality is like the ones you see on Grey's Anatomy?
Yeah.
We watch it for fun, but it's sort of interesting because I think when people watch other forms of media and they see lawyers and doctors and policemen and whatnot on TV, they're aware of the fact that it's not actually like that in real life. Whereas for some reason, when it comes to magazine staff or authors, people often think that the reality is like what you see in the movies. It's sort of strange how that happens. But I think it was a path that I never imagined myself doing, even though every part of it is something that I was meant for because of that cultural background and the opportunities that weren't necessarily there at the time.
What was your aha moment when you made the decision to go into media?
So my first official media job, after the Yelp internship, I was doing marketing and PR. I was writing their newsletters, and I realized how much I loved writing those newsletters. It was the part where I came alive. And I started doing a bit of freelancing on the side, realizing that I could earn a bit of money for my words. So that was really exciting. And then after that, I ended up going on to work in a newspaper as a copy editor. And it's sort of strange because I fell into it in that sense. But the aha moment was when I realized, as silly as it sounds, I had spent my entire college career and my high school helping my friends write and edit their papers. And I was already doing it.
Yeah.
And that was what I had been meant to be doing my whole life. I had grown up spending my childhood with my nose stuck in a book. Spelling was always my thing. And I realized that words were always my forte. It's just that I'd never really been paying attention because I was so dead set on the idea that I couldn't make a career out of it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think sometimes, unless you're trained as a lawyer or a doctor and you've got to go do that career, oftentimes we've got the skills, obtained some skills that we are doing that career. So when we start that career, we already have the groundwork of those skills there. Like I got my start in Washington and interning in the White House and Congress, but I was always in the communications department.
Right.
I never envisioned going into media, but the groundwork was there, so I didn't find the magazine world particularly tough because I was always doing writing. So sometimes I think we start doing things that are already there. Yeah.
They've always been in you.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I grew up reading stories my whole life, and one of my lifelong dreams still is to become a YA author. And one of the reasons why is because when I was growing up and life got hard, whether it was mentally or emotionally or, in any other way, socially speaking, I would disappear into the world of a book because when I felt lonely, that's where I could make friends that understood me. When I didn't feel understood in my day-to-day life, it was where I could live in a fantastical world where the hero could win and good always triumphed over evil. And I found such solace in those worlds. And it also was the place where I learned about what the rest of the world was. I was this mixed kid growing up in Sharjah before we moved to Dubai. And I learned so much about the rest of the world and what different cultures were like, as well as what other people were like within these other situations through reading. And I always wanted to grow up and end up writing something like that someday. So I always dreamed of writing books, and I still do dream of doing that. And realizing that magazines were another way I could end up doing that, other forms of journalism, was a real light bulb moment for me. But it was also the fact that I think storytelling is an inherent part of human history. And I think most jobs have some element of storytelling to it. So whether you work as a magazine editor or you work on some other form of media, or even if you're not actually working in media, I think there are so many jobs out there that have an element of storytelling to it. And to be a good storyteller is a really powerful skill.
Yeah.
And I think as you grow up and you realize, how do you tell a story when you're talking to other people, whether it's about your latest holiday or something really amazing that's happening to you, or something that, let's say, I don't know, a friend of yours experienced and you're trying to share that with someone. If you can't resist doing those things, you are a storyteller.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when you've got a nose for a good story and you know what it is that's going to hold the conversation at a dinner table, all of these are different elements of storytelling that I think are very powerful.
Indeed, they are. Some people, there may be a student listening now who dreamt since kindergarten to be a journalist or to be a broadcast journalist. As you know, the media landscape at the moment is quite tough with the rise of AI and media companies scaling down. How do you see the landscape of media, and would you advise a young person to go into the industry?
So it's funny, for the past couple of years, I've been going to my high school's annual Year 11 career advisory. And last year when I went, I was so excited, full of beans. And this year, I had a little bit of a panic attack before I went. Well, it wasn't a real panic attack, but I was concerned because I thought, oh God, if I'm sitting there having an existential crisis about my career, how am I supposed to go there and excite young minds about it? But the truth is, it was a great instigator because it made me sit down and think about it too. And the truth is, I think it's so easy for a lot of people to sit there and say, oh my gosh, I'm scared of AI and technology because all these machines are going to take our jobs. I think that at the end of the day, technology can help take over a lot of the admin aspects, but one of the most powerful aspects of storytelling is that human element. I remember even during the brief time that I worked at an agency, it was always, whenever we would sit down to brainstorm something for a client, it was always the same idea. Are we going to make them laugh? Are we going to make them angry? Are we going to make them cry? Are we going to rouse them? Whatever it is, you have to stir up an emotion. And I think that it's something that relatability, the way you can make people feel from a piece of media, whatever form that comes in, whether it's words or visual, I think that's never going to be taken away. And I think that's how it should evolve. And I think there will always be a need for it. And I think no matter how much someone manages to train AI or certain technology, for instance, I know it's scary, the idea that a lot of tasks will be replaced. I think on the serious side, first of all, there will always be a need for a human element. And I think human editors are going to be very necessary. You'll also need people who are going to be able to prompt machine work because they won't be able to come up with it on our own, that ideation aspect. But if I'm going to be realistic, I think one of the effects of that, honestly, is that it will be a lot harder for young people to get their foot in the door because I think opportunities are going to, all those easy, I don't want to say easy necessarily, but the simpler tasks that require less experience that younger people traditionally would have taken on. That's how they cut their teeth, that's how they practice, that's how they gain that experience. A lot of those things are going to be replaced by AI and similar technology. And so when they are, how are the young people going to be able to gain that experience that they need in order to get to that senior level, which will still be in demand? And I think that's the question that hasn't been answered yet. I think one of the ways you can get around that is, I don't want to say necessarily volunteer because I think it's important for people to be paid for their work, but start doing it as soon as you can. Show that you can do those things. You can start a blog, you can start other forms of media, start a Substack, start a YouTube channel, tell stories on your Instagram. Write for publications if you can get in there, write short stories, write fiction, submit to literary magazines, whatever it is, the sooner you can start showing people what you can do, that body of experience for your portfolio, it can come from anywhere. You don't have to wait until you're already in the working world for someone to give you that chance, because that is one of the flip sides where technology has enabled us to create a whole new realm of opportunities to prove ourselves that didn't exist before. So I think that would be a really smart way to go around it if you're very serious about it. And I think the other thing is also stay open-minded, because wanting to be a journalist in a certain type of way right now, let's say you're in high school, by the time you graduate, whether from high school or university, that platform might not exist anymore as you know it. So you have to remain agile and open to the idea that things are going to keep changing. You want to stay on top of what new technology is out there, and the way that is changing the media landscape. So I think making sure that you are paying attention so you can stay one step ahead of the game, or at least so that you don't fall behind, is really important.
For sure. What would you advise a young person to go into media in 2025?
I absolutely would never recommend someone to not do it, because I love what I do. I think it's so important, and I am a staunch advocate of the fact that I think real journalism and media will always have its place. But I also think it is not something for the faint of heart. It's something that you have to think about seriously. It is important to have other skills in the bag. You might even try it for a while and decide that it's not for you, but I think that ability to remain agile is really important. And I think people also need to remember it is a job. So while it can come with a fun aspect, and I think it's always portrayed, or often rather portrayed as something sort of fun and on the lighthearted side, particularly if you look at magazine journalism and things like that. Obviously, reporting and hard news and, war zones, it's a very different circumstance. But I think you need to think about the serious aspect of what it involves, and that it is a profession that needs to be treated with a certain degree of commitment as much as everything else. It comes with its ups and downs, and it can be, I think niches will find their place, and so if you have your niche, you'll absolutely be able to grow. If you're going to be a generalist, be the best generalist you can be with as much experience as possible. But ultimately, if you're going to go into media, much like writing novels, to be honest, you're never going to finish a book if you don't truly want it. It's very easy to start one. It's not so easy to finish one. I would say it's the same for media. You have to have a passion for this career, because if not, then you're not going to last. It can be cutthroat. There's so much competition, and that competition is only going to keep increasing. The amount of editors in the world, the amount of roles that are there, these opportunities are decreasing in the traditional sense that we know it. New opportunities are out there, but again, to be able to be proactive enough to go and create something and make your own way, you have to really want it. So if it's something that you're thinking of doing because it's fun and easy, or because you have this idea of what it might be, I would say go and try it out, but have a backup plan. But if you want it, then you will go a long way, because you have to know that you can go the distance. But I would say that's pretty much true of anything in life.
Yeah.
If whether you want to be an athlete or you want to succeed in any other industry, the secret to being a success is to make sure that you really want it, so to give it the best that you can.
Yeah, the passion. You said something very poignant. You said it's good to have like other skills like within media. And I was just at the Cannes Film Festival, and I was chatting with an editor, or she's on staff for a well-known publication, and it's tiring work being at film festivals and in fashion, because you're running around to different shows or different premieres, whatever. And she said, I don't know how long I can keep doing this. But she said, I don't have any other skills. And I think that's not a good place to be in. So I guess if you're gonna go into media and you've made that decision, do you know what it means to be a speechwriter? The basics of communications, have these other transferable skills within that media communications umbrella. So if it doesn't work out working at a magazine, you could go work in your country's government as a speechwriter for a leader, or knowing about the book world. That helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have quite a few friends who wanted to go freelance, and I tried to explain to them that if the majority of your career and the bulk of your portfolio is writing articles for magazines, for instance, or even if you've expanded into news, it would be wise to consider how you could expand into writing marketing copy, for instance, maybe moving into PR, maybe doing some ghostwriting, or as you said, speech writing, things like that, thought leadership pieces, to utilize those skills. But to tell you the truth, I think there's another aspect to it where I understand that feeling, and I have been in that situation as well, where I have moments where I think, oh God, what else can I do?
Yeah.
When you stop and think about it, you actually can do so much more than you realize. And I think while on the one hand perception matters and you don't want other people to put you into a box, I think I would also advise people to not put yourself into a box. It is so easy to say, this is all I know how to do. But if you stop and you think about it, if you were a product that you wanted to sell, actually, you're not just a writer, you're not just a so-and-so. For example, if you're a magazine editor, you're going to be amazing at project management. The whole thing is juggling constantly, non-stop. Yeah. You have an eye for design, you know how to spot a pattern, you're great at spotting trends. Are there forecasts and trend analysis things you can work on as well, for instance? You have to be great with people, so you're able to run interviews. If you're an editor of a magazine in quite a senior position in editorial, most of the time you'll end up on partnership meetings, because nowadays there's always sponsored content, and if you're in that room with a client, then it means you do know how to pitch.
Yeah,
and so
sales,
I think when you
yeah.
Exactly, and so I think a lot of the time we tend to underestimate ourselves as well. Forget that, for example, if you work on photo shoots as well, you know how to construct that. If you've ever had an event as part of your brand, you know how to do that as well. So I think it would be wise to write down all of the things that you've done and understand how that would look through the lens of someone else. It's so easy to take yourself for granted because we've been doing it for so long that we think this is easy and everyone knows how to do it. But actually not everyone does. And there's actually this talent agency that I've seen on LinkedIn. It's based in the US, so it's not really relevant for people in the Middle East, but there's this woman, I think she's called the Talent Fairy.
Okay.
And I think one of her taglines is editors make the best hires. And she writes about how she places editors in other types of roles when they're ready to move on or sort of even move sideways. And I found it really interesting because it really helped me open up my mind as to the different ways that you can market yourself. At the end of the day, if you have a piece of content and you've got 4 different angles to this story, part of your job as an editor is to find the best and strongest hook. Why can't we do that for ourselves?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
I think sometimes, don't sell yourself short because you think this is all I can do, because maybe it's how you present yourself and you market it. And if you do feel like you're lacking in a certain skill set that you want to be able to grow, then that's how you can identify it to get a little more experience in that as well.
That's true. And I think we're pushed to realize our other skills when we are applying for a job and we've got to put our CV together or revamp it, because then you begin to realize, oh yeah, I've done event planning as an editor. I know how to do panel discussions and sales, and it starts flowing when you realize you've got to revamp your CV.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's a typical day like for you as a magazine editor?
On the one hand, one of the things I love about this job is there is no such thing as a typical day, in the sense that no day is ever really the same. It's one of the things that keeps me coming back to this industry, where even when I've left for a little while to try other things, like I worked at a startup, I worked at semi-government for a while, I've worked at an agency, and I've come back to magazines because I really miss this and I truly love it. Because you're always working on a new feature, there's always a new story, there's always an exciting new angle to find, and you never get bored in that sense. But as far as the structure of, at least I work on a monthly title at the moment, there'll be the week that you source and field all the stories, there'll be the week that you do your deep writing, there'll be the week that you start submitting and then you start editing it with design, there'll be the week that you're the crazy week where you tidy everything up and it's going to press. But ultimately, to be honest, especially with staff, being in such small quantities at the moment all across the world, I think a lot of people think it's such a glamorous job. My day, I always joke to people, I don't know what people imagine a writer would be like, because my day is pretty much me sitting with the biggest mug of coffee I could possibly make and sitting in front of a computer and a keyboard for as long as I humanly can, jamming out words, editing words, tightening sentences, working on interviews, doing emails. Like it's literally a typical day. It's me sitting in front of my computer all day long.
Yeah.
And it's long hours sometimes, and it's really late night sometimes. Otherwise, you'll sometimes head out of the office to do an interesting interview. You'll sometimes catch a story, but like at the end of the day, the bulk of it is actually creating the work.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. Then I drive home and I see my cats and try and squeeze in the gym.
Yeah. It's busy moments. It sounds like it's busy moments, especially as it gets closer to the end of the month. But,
definitely. But yeah, I think it's always juggling, and you have to be able to keep your eye on what's happening on the day-to-day basis, as well as on the big picture at the same time, which is one of the things that does make us good at project management. You're always managing multiple things at the same time, and that's what makes it tick along smoothly.
A couple of last questions. What do you enjoy about being the editor of a travel publication versus other, like women's health?
So, to be honest, I think for me, I've been really blessed in the sense that, and I think some of it was intentional as well, of course. I think the editor's personality and your interests will always lend to your expertise on the topic. I don't think it's completely separated ever. But at the end of the day, I've been working on travel magazines since my very first job in magazines.
Oh, okay.
One of my first ever publications that I worked on was an in-flight magazine, and so I've always loved it. But for me, I was on my first plane before I could even really speak. As a mixed race, third culture kid who is very, very privileged and blessed to have had the opportunity to travel a fair bit when I was young. I think it's always been in me, and to me, travel is one of the greatest teachers in the world. So it does help that I'm immensely passionate about it. I mean, when I was on women's health, one of the blessings as well is that I'm also a certified personal trainer. I'm a meditation teacher and mindfulness coach. I do sound healing. So again, I'm very passionate about it. And I think it's one of those weird balances where on the one hand, I'm incredibly passionate about this topic. So it's easy for me to share as much information as I can about it. But I think one of the keys to being a good editor is it's very important. And I think this is something that's very important in all forms of journalism. The passion is what helps to inform your expertise, but it shouldn't then become a mouthpiece for you to push your views on everyone, because at the end of the day, when you're working for a certain brand or publication, your job is to not write about your views on it. You can use your passion to help lend you the expertise and the knowledge to share as much information as possible. But your job is not to then put your opinions and thoughts and feelings into it. Your job is to just simply put the information out there so that other people can make their own choices about what's out there.
Right.
And I think, for example, if I'm going to just be really blunt, when I was working on women's health, I personally am not a fan of CrossFit. I've never been able to get into it. I've tried CrossFit gyms. I've even been to Reebok headquarters in the States and, done a workout there. I think it's a great workout for other people, but it's just not for me.
Yeah.
But CrossFit is huge in the Middle East. And during the time that I was the editor-in-chief of Women's Health, it was enormous in this region. So imagine if I had never put CrossFit on the cover or in the magazine because I personally wasn't particularly excited about it. It's not Yi-Hwa magazine.
Yeah,
it was Women's Health magazine. Absolutely. It's not about what I want. It's about what the audience wants. And so I think that is something really important to remember as well, because I think that's a lot of where the blurred lines that I see when I see content creators from other streams of media. It's very different depending on what type of media. For example, if you're a content creator on YouTube, if you're an influencer who's sharing travel content on Instagram, for instance, or Reels or TikTok or something like that, your personal views are part of the reason why people subscribe. They are here to hear your opinion. They do want to hear your personal recommendation. They want to hear what you think, what you like, and what you don't like. They don't just want you to give them the information necessarily, depending on your channel and your angle and what your whole vibe is. But when you pick up a magazine, again, it's not your magazine. If it's my personal blog, that's a different story, but I'm here to do it for the audience of the brand. The editor should never think that their views are bigger than the brand, and I think that's something really important to remember. All of your passion, all that knowledge is there to help push that forward and to offer more to the reader.
Yeah, I hear you. It's hard to get the attention of an editor. If you want to pitch an article, do you have any advice to somebody who's been trying to get the editor's attention to pitch?
Oh gosh, this feels like a loaded question.
Better.
So this is a really difficult one to answer because I think one thing people often forget is that I don't want to sound like the cliche of that generational warfare of saying some people are being lazy about it and blah, blah, blah. It's not necessarily the case. It's just that I think people have to remember that, think about the numbers, how few editors are out there and how many emails, the sheer amount of communication that popped into, and it's not just emails.
How many emails are you getting a day? 100?
I mean, to be honest, I've lost count because I don't have time to count it every day. We're so time poor because you're extremely busy and there's so much going on. And I know a lot of people are busy, but for instance, I went away on a 4 or 5 day mini break to celebrate my birthday recently. And when I came back, my email inbox was at 3,741
oh my goodness.
Unread emails. And some of them were left over from before I went on my trip because I will never be able to clear my inbox to zero as much as I would love to.
Yeah.
But part of the reason is because I am getting in there will be some irrelevant pitches and things get lost. And sometimes I'm on mailing lists for things where I think, oh gosh, why on earth am I receiving this? And so as much as we would love to give more attention to the things that stand out, we're not trying to also just be particularly picky. It's really difficult because when it's just that sheer amount of volume at the end of the day. So I would say just try and remember how incredibly time-strapped most editors are. And also, I think don't take it personally. There's a lot of people out there who think, oh, the editors don't want to take my pitch, they don't like me, or why won't they do so-and-so? Just because you want something and you think something is a great idea or something that you personally might like to read doesn't necessarily mean that the editor will believe that the audience will want it. Maybe that editor really likes you, maybe they like the way you write, maybe they like the piece that you've pitched, but it might not be the right fit for them at this time. Simply it's just the wrong timing. Maybe they just don't think it's the right fit for this brand. There are a million reasons. And I think in any creative field, it's sort of the same when you're pitching literary agents. Rejection is just part of the game. You have to have a thick skin. It's very competitive, but it's also because the amount of volume that, for example, literary agents get with their queries every day, they simply can't sit down and send every single person a response and consider every single one because there is no time for it. Yeah. And so you can't take it super personally. It's the same with a magazine editor. Yeah. So the other thing I'll say is, and I can't believe I'm saying this because you would think it's a given, but pick up the publication and read it. Yeah. It's amazing to me how many people don't have a look and they'll pitch things to you where you think, have you ever even glanced at the magazine? Because it's so not the right fit. And when it's that off base, you don't think it's simply that they maybe misunderstood or something. They've clearly never read it. So you don't know what they're in it for. And then I think the other thing is also just to remember, respect the publication, act professional. It sounds so simple, but there are so many instances where I think people see it as something so easy, and take it seriously, because this is someone's job, it's our livelihood. For instance, sometimes I'll get freelancers who are professional writers and journalists pitch me, and even within the field of professionals, it'll be like some of them will be more professional than others. And then you'll have some other people who aren't necessarily professional journalists. They have an entirely other career. They just really enjoy writing. And some of them will be super professional and some of them won't. But I think if you're going to treat this like it's a hobby or like it's not serious, or you're doing it for the wrong reasons, for instance, it's a little disrespectful to the fact that this is someone's real job and it's serious work. And with that large volume, I think we live in an attention economy no matter what industry you're in. So everyone's time, no matter what you do for a living, is valuable. So just be a little considerate of that and have a clean pitch. The amount of times I get people who message me saying, I'd love to write for your magazine. I fancy doing some travel writing. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. What do you want to do? Where's the pitch? That's not a pitch. I need an actual pitch. Can you tell me like the number of words it's going to be? Like it's go on Google. If you don't know how to do it, learn how to write a pitch. Tell me how many words you have in mind. Tell me who you're going to speak to. Will you be able to supply images or not? Is there a section that you feel that it would fit in? What kind of rates would you charge? Are you open to whatever rates we would charge? Are you going to charge at all? So that sort of thing. Would you need us to supply anything for you to be able to do it? Is the piece already ready? There are so many different things, but give us as much information as we can and keep it clean and tight. And I know this sounds like sort of cold, but we don't need to hear your life story as well, because there's no time.
I think a lot of people don't have a media experience or writing, contributing experience when I just want to do some travel writing. You've got to get specific and you've got to send clean cut pitches and make sure your grammar is okay, because the one thing editors hate the most is having to correct bad grammar. So
I think definitely, and I think sometimes if you are a contributor that someone's tried a couple of times, but the editor finds that every time you deliver, you don't necessarily fully deliver on what you promised, or it ends up being a lot of work for them. They end up spending more time having to edit and like work on your piece than what it's worth for them. Then they're probably going to stop working with you. And I think the other thing is with travel writing as well. I understand that travel is subjective, and especially if you're writing a first-person piece, but there is an art to writing a first-person piece that is still going to be relevant to the audience. Like for instance, back in the day when I would do F&B writing as well, I was always amazed at the amount of people that would write pieces and say, I'd love to write a review for something, or I'd love to write about this restaurant, for example, and they'd say, I don't know, I'll give you a random example. This just delivered. The plate was too big for my liking. I don't like creamy mashed potatoes, and the potatoes were really creamy, so I would have preferred them. It's not about what you want. That is not a professional review.
That is the reader wants.
That is not what a food review looks like. So I'm sorry, but you actually I'm sorry to use a more, for lack of a better word, or a less blunt word rather, but it makes you look like an amateur, and it makes you look like someone who's in it because you think that your personal opinion is so important that the entire audience of an entire publication is going to care what you like to eat. So you're not looking at it. That's wonderful if you're writing it on a blog, because people are there to find out what you specifically want. That is why they're there. But when you're writing for a publication, you're writing it so that the person reading it can feel informed. So what you can say is, in that weird example, the mashed potatoes are super silky and creamy. So if that's the sort of thing you like, you'll love it. If you prefer them firmer, they might be a little too soft for you, And so I think it's to remember that audience and who you're writing for, and to understand that delivery. And I think people tend to forget that quite a lot when it comes to travel writing, F&B writing, these things where it can feel so subjective. And also, please fact check. It's so incredibly important. And also, I think in this day and age, it is really important to add as well that if you have used AI, you have to disclose it to the editor, because it's really upsetting and quite insulting to an editor when we find out that you haven't told us, and then we run it. We do check, and we can tell most of the time, and we'll run it through something. And I mean, most of the time I look at something, and I've had this happen. I've looked at something and said, 100% ChatGPT did this. And I've asked them about it, and they denied it, or they said, I used it for 1 or 2 lines here and there. And I ran it through the tracker, and it was like 98% AI written. And I know that those AI checkers aren't always 100% accurate, but just be honest, because then you're enabling someone to make a fair and informed decision. Because again, you might get away with it this one time, but all you're going to do is cut that off once you've upset them because of that dishonesty. And I think transparency is really important as well.
It is. It's inspiring what you do, and
thank you.
Maybe in another podcast we could talk about your book editing project and that you're writing a novel, which is pretty exciting. But thank you so much for your time and your thoughts on the landscape of media in 2025.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me and letting me ramble.
Of course. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.